Hi, today we're going to look at section 6.6, which is kites, and as you see on the screen we have a picture of a kite here. We'll look at some of the properties and how we'll use them. I'm looking at a kite right now, and if I look at the diagonals inside the kite, if I moved 1 point, the diagonals are going to move as well, but something that's consistent about them is, do you notice that the diagonals are making a right angle, actually 4 right angles? So go to your vocab packet and make sure that you're looking at the column about kites. I'm going to start at the bottom, and the diagonals are perpendicular to each other. That's something that's true. Let's also look at some other things about the diagonals. For instance, if I look at the angles that this diagonal goes to, can you tell that the top of angle C and the bottom of angle C are not the same? That angle was not bisected. But what actually is true is angle B, the left and the right side, those are the same, just like down here. So one diagonal bisected opposite angles, but not both of them. And we're going to kind of accommodate that into here. So when it says diagonals bisect the angles, I'm going to say one pair is bisected. We'll make a little note later to identify which pair. Can you tell whether the diagonals are congruent? Does that look true? Maybe you can tell that AC is going to be shorter than BD. So on our vocab packet, this is going to be an X where it says diagonals are congruent. Diagonals bisect each other. Well, this is going to be another one where it's kind of true. This diagonal, the left side and the right side are congruent, but the top and the bottom are not. Even if I move it, can you see the top is still shorter than the bottom? The left side still looks like it's the same as the right side. And basically the reasons that these are happening is because of congruent triangles. We have a bunch of congruent triangles in there. But once again, I have something that is working and not working. So where it says diagonals bisect each other, I'm going to again say one pair, or in this case, one diagonal, and we'll identify that piece later on. In terms of the actual angles of the kite, angles A, angles B, angles C, so not so much worried about these diagonals anymore. The line where it says that they're right angles, no, that's not required to be true. And now let's look a little more at some angles, but also some of the sides of the kite. I'm looking at the sides where the lengths are measured. Can you see that two sides are congruent? One side is congruent to another, and then that's true for the other set. So sides are going to be congruent to each other, but not opposite sides. It's adjacent sides. Also, can you tell that these two lines are not parallel to each other? In fact, nothing is parallel to each other in this. So looking up here, opposite sides are parallel. No, that's not true, but opposite sides are congruent. Opposite sides are not congruent, but it's still pretty important to say that you're going to have pairs of adjacent sides that are. And again, if you're not good with the word adjacent, then you probably want to write down the phrase next to, or maybe the word consecutive. Where it says all sides are congruent, no, that's not true. But let's talk about the angles now. Opposite angles are congruent. If I'm looking at this picture, angles B and angles D, angles A and angles C are what we're talking about. Let me change this a little bit, see if you can make some guesses about the angles. I'll actually show you the degrees now. Opposite angles are congruent. Well, it looks like that's happening for these two, but not for these two. What happens if you add these two together? What if you add these two together? Are they supplementary? Doesn't seem like it. So what's happening right now is we have two angles that are congruent. The other two, not only are they not congruent, they're also not even supplementary. So where it says opposite angles are congruent, again I'm going to say one pair. where it says adjacent angles are supplementary. Well, you know what? I haven't checked that out yet. Did that seem to be true? These two don't add to 180. Do these two? No, they don't. If it's not true in one, then it's not going to be true in all the rest. It might be true in one of the rest, but not all the rest. So right here, I'm going to put an X. I want to look at the fact that there's a few rules that work and don't work at the same time. Will you draw 3 kites into your vocab packet, and when you're ready to look at the rules, start this up again? I want to look at how some of the rules are partially true. I'm going to look at these two and denote that down below with this first kite. So we're going to look at the idea that opposite angles are congruent, that that's true for one pair of angles, and then the fact that adjacent sides are congruent. So it's not up to you which opposite angles and which adjacent sides. So I've marked the 2 angles that would be congruent to each other. The sides that would be congruent to each other, those 2 would go with each other, and these 2 with each other. So when we say adjacent sides, we've got to be careful. That's not true for all adjacent sides. So for instance, this side and this side, those are not congruent to each other, and yet they're still adjacent. So we got to be careful about these special rules. Let's also look at diagonals bisecting each other, how that's true for one problem. I'm going to denote that as the kite with the star next to it. So when we say diagonals bisect each other, if we have 2 diagonals in here, the only ones that are congruent to each other that are cut in half is this left side, and this right side would equal to each other. And finally, we're going to talk about how diagonals bisect the angles, this idea right here. The diagonal that's bisecting angles is this up and down diagonal, or the way that I have this picture drawn. So the left side and the right side are going to be cut in half. So this one is congruent to this one. Now don't mark the bottom exactly the same as the top. This left side and the right side will be equal to each other, but the bottom angle and the top angle will not necessarily be congruent to each other. So that was a lot of rules about properties. Now let's go to page 13 of your notes and start practicing some of these. Again, at any time, you might need to pause it and then start it up when you're ready to hear the solution, or in this case, maybe you need to pause it so that you can find page 13. We are told in problem 1 that we have a kite, so all those properties that we just talked about have to be true. We have been told that angles that are opposite each other, that there's one pair that's congruent, so these are going to be the 2 angles that are congruent to each other, so this is going to be 85 degrees. But we had said that these 2 actually are not going to be congruent to each other, so I can't call that 120. We also said they're not supplementary or anything like that, so that seems kind of strange that we don't know anything about this angle. But something we haven't talked about yet is the fact that in the quadrilateral, since it's a quadrilateral, we actually know that there's 360 degrees total in here. So to find that angle that's left over, I can subtract off all of this. See if you can figure out what the solution to that is going to be. Did you get that angle C was going to be 70 degrees? Can you figure out the answer for question 2? Now's a good time to pause it and check your answers when you're ready. I had calculated that I had 160 degrees remaining left in this kite, and since I know that my 2 angles that are across from each other in this way are congruent to each other, that 160 degrees has to be split up evenly, so I got that both of these are 80 degrees. All right, look at your next question. This question is all about sides. Why don't you mark the sides of each of the givens? Did you notice that the 2 sides that were marked as congruent are also sides that you know information about? I hope you are thinking, oh, that's good. I can set them equal to each other. So set them equal to each other and see if you can finish off the questions in problem 3. It's all about sides. And then also see if you can get through problem 4. That one's going to be about sides and angles. And when you're ready to check all that, come back and look at this screen. How'd you do on these questions? Did you remember your old Pythagorean theorem? That's what I needed for this last one. Here's the equation that I set up based off of this triangle that I have right here. And then I used my calculator to get the answer to look like 8 square root of 2, or maybe you wrote it as a decimal. If you got them to work out, fantastic. Move on to problem number 5. If not, now's the time to stop, see if you can get some help, and then pick up at number 5. When you're ready for your answers to number 5, restart this. Did you get this for number 5? I took all of the degrees and subtracted off the 2 I knew in the picture. That left me with 296. And since these two are congruent to each other, when I divided 296 in half, that meant each one of them were 148 degrees. All right, at this time, if you're good to go with these questions, then you're going to start working on your worksheet. Maybe you already have it, or maybe you need to ask for it. Good luck.